Dr. Samuel Hayes stood in the corridor of Asclepius Prime's medical wing, clutching a cup of coffee that had achieved the perfect balance between liquid caffeine and industrial solvent, while trying to look like he belonged among the galaxy's most prestigious healing institutions. The medical station attracted the finest physicians from dozens of species, their advanced degrees and genetic enhancements creating an atmosphere of clinical excellence that made Sam feel like he'd accidentally wandered into a convention for beings who'd actually read the manuals he'd skimmed. Dr. Hayes announced the station's administrative AI with the kind of polite efficiency that suggested it had already calculated his probability of success and found the results disappointing. You have been assigned to consultation on patient 7741E. The case involves terminal crystalline circulatory syndrome in an Etherean female. Previous treating physicians have recommended comfort protocols only. Sam sipped his coffee, noting that the AI had managed to make comfort protocols sound like a euphemism for giving up with dignity. Comfort protocols meaning we make her comfortable while she dies, or comfortable while we figure out how to keep her from dying. The former. The condition is considered medically intractable across all known treatment modalities. Ah. So this is one of those impossible cases that gets handed to the human because nobody expects miracles from primitive baseline medicine situations. That would be an accurate assessment. Sam grinned, feeling the familiar warmth of a challenge that everyone else had already declared hopeless. Perfect. Those are my favorite kind. The patient's room was a study in advanced medical technology arranged around what appeared to be controlled surrender to the inevitable. Lyra Dex'tahar lay amid diagnostic equipment that hummed with the quiet efficiency of machines monitoring someone's decline with perfect precision, her translucent Etherean skin showing traceries of crystalline formations that spread through her circulatory system like beautiful, deadly art. Her parents, both tall and elegant with the luminous features that marked their species, stood beside the bed with the careful composure of people who'd been told to prepare for loss. Their silver eyes held depths of grief that spoke of months spent watching their daughter fade despite access to the galaxy's most advanced medical care. Mr. and Mrs. Dex'tahar, Sam said, offering his hand with the casual friendliness he'd use for any introduction, I'm Dr. Hayes. I understand you're looking for alternative perspectives on Lyra's condition. Dar. Hayes, Lyra's father replied, accepting the handshake with the careful courtesy of someone trying to maintain hope against overwhelming odds. We were told that human medicine might offer different approaches to conditions that our physicians consider untreatable. Different approaches, Sam agreed, moving toward Lyra's bedside with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent years treating the supposedly untreatable. I specialize in conditions that don't respond well to conventional wisdom. Though I should warn you that my methods tend to involve a lot of creative guessing and strategic caffeine consumption. Lyra turned her head toward him, her silver eyes bright with intelligence despite the weakness that made every movement an effort. The crystalline formations in her skin caught the room's ambient light, creating patterns that were undeniably beautiful and obviously lethal. Dar. Hayes, she said, her voice soft but clear, are you the human physician that the Carillion doctors described as aggressively optimistic about hopeless cases? That's probably me, though I prefer to think of myself as creatively stubborn about problems that just haven't been solved yet. Sam settled into the chair beside her bed, his attention focused on her face rather than the diagnostic displays showing her declining vital signs. How are you feeling today? And please don't say, fine, because your medical readings suggest that, fine, is not currently an accurate assessment of your situation. Something that might have been amusement flickered in Lyra's eyes. I feel like I'm slowly turning into a very pretty sculpture, which is aesthetically interesting but functionally problematic. That's an excellent description. Very artistic and medically accurate. Sam activated his portable diagnostic unit, which looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and good intentions but somehow produced readings more detailed than the room's expensive monitoring systems. The crystallization is following your circulatory system, creating beautiful patterns that are unfortunately incompatible with continued cardiovascular function. The specialists have explained that the condition is genetic, progressive, and invariably fatal, Lyra's mother interjected. They estimate perhaps 3 weeks before the crystallization reaches critical organs. 3 weeks according to current progression rates, Sam corrected, studying readings that showed intricate details of Lyra's biological systems. Though progression rates can change if we give them reasons to change. The question is whether we can figure out what those reasons might be. Dr. Dex'tahar, the chief Etherean physician, chose that moment to enter with the kind of authoritative presence that suggested he'd come to ensure that proper medical protocol was being observed. His luminous features were arranged in expressions of professional concern mixed with what looked like protective territoriality. Dr. Hayes, he said with the tone of someone addressing a well-meaning amateur, I trust you understand that this case has been thoroughly evaluated by specialists in Etherean physiology. The patient's condition is beyond current medical intervention. Dr. Dex'tahar, Sam replied cheerfully, not looking up from his diagnostic readings, I understand that specialists in Etherean physiology have concluded that current medical intervention isn't sufficient. That's not quite the same thing as saying the condition is beyond intervention entirely. The distinction is semantic rather than practical. Maybe, but I've found that semantic distinctions sometimes lead to practical solutions that weren't visible from the original perspective. Sam highlighted patterns in Lyra's bio-readings that showed complex interactions between her crystallization and her body's other systems. For instance, your analysis focuses on the crystallization as a disease process that needs to be stopped. But what if the crystallization is actually a symptom of something else, a defensive response that's gotten stuck in active mode? Dr. Dex'tahar's expression shifted to the kind of patience usually reserved for explaining obvious concepts to children. The genetic markers are clear. This is a hereditary condition with well-documented progression patterns. Absolutely. But hereditary conditions can still have environmental triggers or regulatory mechanisms that weren't obvious when the condition was first classified. Sam turned to Lyra, whose attention had sharpened as she listened to someone discuss her illness as a puzzle rather than a death sentence. Lyra, has anyone ever asked you what you were doing or where you were living when the crystallization first appeared? The onset was gradual, she replied thoughtfully. I first noticed the formations about 8 months ago, shortly after I moved to the industrial sector for my apprenticeship in atmospheric systems engineering. Industrial sector, Sam repeated, his interest clearly piqued. What kind of atmospheric processing? Were you working with any unusual chemical compounds or energy fields? Standard terraforming atmospheric processors, but some of the older units used rare mineral catalysts that were phased out decades ago for safety reasons. Dr. Dex'tahar interrupted with visible irritation. Dr. Hayes, environmental factors have been ruled out. This is clearly a genetic condition that might be a genetic response to environmental factors that your people encountered so long ago that the response became hereditary, Sam finished. Evolution doesn't create random defensive mechanisms. If Lyra's body is producing crystalline structures, there's probably a reason related to protecting her from something. That is highly speculative medical theorizing. All good medicine starts with speculative theorizing. The question is whether we test the theories or just accept them as untestable. Sam stood up, his expression carrying the kind of enthusiasm that usually preceded either brilliant breakthroughs or spectacular disasters. Lyra, would you be interested in some experimental approaches to convincing your body that it doesn't need to protect itself quite so enthusiastically? You mean you want to try to cure a condition that the galaxy's best physicians have declared incurable? I mean I want to try approaches that the galaxy's best physicians haven't considered because they're not trained in human-style stubborn refusal to accept impossible diagnoses. Lyra looked at her parents, then at Dr. Dex'tahar, then back at Sam with expressions that cycled through hope, desperation, and something that might have been trust. What would these experimental approaches involve? A lot of creative problem-solving, some educated guessing based on human medical experience with similar conditions, and probably several approaches that will fail spectacularly before we find ones that work. Sam's grin was infectious in ways that clinical professionalism rarely managed. But also genuine partnership, where you help me understand how your body works and I help your body remember how to work the way it's supposed to. Partnership. You know more about what it feels like to live in your body than any outside observer ever could. I know more about creative ways to convince biological systems to change their behavior than most physicians learn in traditional training. Together, we might be able to figure out things that neither of us could manage alone. Dr. Veltar's luminous features darkened with disapproval. This approach violates established protocols for terminal patient care. Offering false hope through unproven experimental treatments is not ethical medical practice. Offering genuine partnership and creative problem-solving isn't false hope, Sam replied calmly. It's recognition that patients are people rather than just collections of symptoms, and that people deserve the chance to participate in their own healing rather than just accept their own dying. Lyra's parents looked between the two physicians, one representing the established certainty of medical expertise, the other representing the uncertain possibility of alternative approaches. Their daughter's condition left them with a choice between accepting inevitable loss or risking disappointment through hope. Dr. Hayes, Lyra's father said finally, "What exactly are you proposing?" "I'm proposing that we treat your daughter's condition as an engineering problem rather than just a medical tragedy. Engineering problems have solutions, even if those solutions require unconventional approaches and creative thinking. And if your unconventional approaches fail, then we'll have learned valuable information about what doesn't work, and we'll try different unconventional approaches until we find ones that do work." Sam looked directly at Lyra, whose silver eyes held cautious but growing hope. "But we won't know what's possible until we try approaches that haven't been attempted yet." Lyra was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving between the physicians who represented two completely different philosophies of medicine. One based on expertise and established knowledge, the other based on creativity and stubborn optimism. "Dr. Hayes," she said finally, "when do we start?" "Right now, if you're ready. Though I should warn you that my approach to medicine involves a lot of questions about things that aren't usually considered medically relevant, and occasionally talking to medical equipment like it has feelings." "Why do you talk to medical equipment?" "Because I've found that technology responds better when you treat it like a partner rather than just a tool. Same principle applies to biological systems, actually." Sam activated his diagnostic unit again, which immediately began producing detailed readings while emitting what sounded like satisfied electronic humming. "See? It likes being appreciated for its contribution to the healing process." For the first time in months, Lyra laughed, a sound that was weak but genuine, carrying notes of hope that her family hadn't heard since her diagnosis. Even Dr. Veltar paused in his disapproval, surprised by the transformation in his patient's demeanor. "Dr. Hayes," Lyra said, "I think I'm going to enjoy being your partner in solving impossible medical engineering problems." "Excellent," Sam replied, already beginning the complex work of understanding how an Etherean circulatory system had become a beautiful, deadly sculpture. "Because I have a feeling this is going to be the kind of challenging case that requires all the creative partnership we can manage." 2 weeks of conventional medical failure had transformed Sam's assigned workspace into something that looked like a collision between a research laboratory and a very enthusiastic amateur's workshop. Holographic displays showing Etherean biochemistry floated alongside jury-rigged medical devices that appeared to have been assembled by someone who understood function more than form, while Lyra sat in the center of it all like a patient, partner, and test pilot rolled into one increasingly hopeful package. "The crystallization rate has decreased by 12%, Sam announced, manipulating data streams that showed the intricate dance between Lyra's biology and the experimental treatments they'd been developing. Which is either a measurement error, a temporary fluctuation, or proof that your body responds to creative encouragement." "Creative encouragement?" Lyra asked, watching her latest bio readings with the fascination of someone who'd been told her death was inevitable but was discovering that inevitability might be negotiable. "My theory is that biological systems, like most complex systems, respond better to collaboration than to force. Instead of trying to stop the crystallization with aggressive intervention, we've been asking your body why it thinks crystallization is necessary and then providing alternative solutions to whatever problem it's trying to solve." Dr. Veltar observed from the doorway with the expression of someone watching a promising student develop dangerously unconventional ideas. "Dr. Hayes, your approaches continue to violate established treatment protocols for terminal genetic conditions. My approaches continue to produce measurable improvements in a patient that established treatment protocols declared beyond help, Sam replied without looking up from his readings. I'm not sure protocol violations are the primary concern at this point. Temporary improvements do not constitute successful treatment. The patient's condition remains fundamentally unchanged. Actually, Lyra interjected with growing confidence, the patient's condition feels significantly changed. The crystalline formations no longer cause the sharp pain they did 2 weeks ago, and I can move without feeling like my circulatory system is trying to turn itself into decorative sculpture. Subjective improvements in comfort do not address the underlying pathology. Maybe not, but they suggest that the underlying pathology might be more flexible than we originally assumed. Sam activated another diagnostic sequence, his equipment producing readings that showed biological activity patterns no conventional scanner could detect. Lyra, how do the crystal formations feel today compared to yesterday? Less rigid. More like they're considering other options rather than committed to their current configuration. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. Sam highlighted portions of her circulatory system where the crystalline structures showed subtle but measurable changes in density and composition. Your body is responding to the modified mineral supplementation and bioelectric field therapy by reassessing whether the crystallization response is still necessary. Dr. Veltar moved closer to examine the readings, his professional skepticism warring with genuine curiosity about results that shouldn't have been possible. These changes are minimal and could represent normal variation in disease progression. Could represent normal variation, Sam agreed. Or could represent the first signs that we're successfully communicating with Lyra's immune system about alternative approaches to environmental protection. Environmental protection. Remember my theory about the crystallization being a defensive response? I think Lyra's genetic heritage includes biological programming designed to protect her ancestors from specific environmental toxins they encountered generations ago. The programming got stuck in active mode, probably triggered by her exposure to those old atmospheric processing systems. Lyra leaned forward with interest, her movement noticeably easier than it had been during their first meeting. You think my body is trying to protect me from dangers that no longer exist? I think your body is trying to protect you from dangers that still exist in trace amounts, using a defense mechanism that was designed for much higher concentration exposures. It's like using a fortress wall to protect against mosquitoes, technically effective, but completely disproportionate to the actual threat level. So the treatment involves convincing my biology that the threat level has decreased. The treatment involves providing your biology with better information about current environmental conditions and alternative protection strategies that don't require turning your circulatory system into a crystal garden. Sam pulled up a holographic model showing the complex interaction between Etherean physiology and various environmental factors, annotated with notes that reflected weeks of collaborative research between human medical knowledge and Lyra's intimate understanding of her own biological responses. The mineral supplementation provides the protective elements your body thinks it needs, but in forms that don't require crystalline structures to be effective. The bioelectric therapy mimics the energy patterns that would naturally occur if your defensive systems were functioning normally instead of being stuck in crisis mode. And the herbal compounds? Adapted from human ethnobotanical medicine, specifically treatments that help biological systems remember how to regulate defensive responses appropriately. Sam grinned with the satisfaction of someone whose creative guessing had produced measurable results. Turns out that humans have extensive experience with convincing overactive immune systems to calm down and assess threats more accurately. Dr. Veltar studied the treatment protocols with growing bewilderment. This approach combines elements from at least 4 different species medical traditions in ways that violate basic principles of biochemical compatibility. It combines elements from 4 different species medical traditions in ways that work synergistically when properly calibrated for Etherean physiology, Sam corrected. Biochemical compatibility is more flexible than most medical training acknowledges, especially when you're dealing with defensive responses that evolve to handle diverse environmental challenges. The statistical probability of successful cross-species treatment protocols is extremely low. The statistical probability of any successful treatment for Lyra's condition was previously considered zero, Lyra pointed out. Even extremely low represents a significant improvement. Sam's communication device chimed with an incoming message from the medical station's administration, displaying text that suggested his unconventional approaches had attracted official attention of the unwelcome variety. Dr. Hayes, the message began with bureaucratic formality. The Medical Review Board has received concerns about experimental treatments being administered without proper approval protocols. You are required to submit detailed documentation of all non-standard therapeutic interventions for immediate evaluation. Non-standard therapeutic interventions, Sam read aloud. I love how they make trying to save someone's life through creative problem-solving sound like a procedural violation. It is a procedural violation, Dr. Veltar pointed out, though his tone suggested his disapproval might be weakening in the face of Lyra's obvious improvement. So is letting people die from treatable conditions because the treatments don't fit established protocols. Treatable conditions. Dr. Veltar, look at these readings. Sam highlighted Lyra's latest diagnostic results, showing crystallization rates that had not only stopped increasing but had begun showing signs of actual reversal. The crystalline formations are becoming less dense, more permeable, and showing biological activity consistent with controlled dissolution. That is not possible with current understanding of this condition. That is not possible with current approaches to this condition, Sam corrected. But current approaches assumed the condition was purely genetic and irreversible. We're proving that it's at least partially environmental and potentially completely treatable. Lyra stood up from her chair, her movement fluid in ways that would have been impossible during their first meeting. The crystalline traceries in her skin still caught the light, but they seemed somehow less prominent, more integrated with her natural coloring rather than dominating it. Dr. Veltar, she said, addressing her species' chief physician with respectful but determined authority, I understand your concerns about proper protocol. But in 2 weeks, Dr. Hayes has achieved improvements that months of conventional treatment failed to produce. I feel better, my bio-readings show measurable progress, and for the first time since my diagnosis, I have reason to believe I might live to see my next birthday. The improvements could be temporary. Untested treatments often produce initial positive responses that prove unsustainable over time. Then we monitor the progress and adjust the treatments as necessary, Sam said. Medical science is supposed to be about learning and adapting, not about maintaining rigid adherence to approaches that don't work. Medical science is supposed to be about proven, safe, reproducible treatments that can be administered across diverse patient populations. Medical science is supposed to be about helping people get better, Lyra interjected. Everything else is just methodology. Dr. Veltar was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving between the diagnostic readings that showed his patient's impossible improvement and the treatment protocols that violated everything he'd been trained to consider proper medicine. The Medical Review Board will require comprehensive documentation, he said finally. Every aspect of the treatment regimen, every modification to standard protocols, every theoretical basis for the experimental approaches. Done, Sam replied immediately. Though I should warn you that the documentation is going to read like a manual for convincing alien biology to cooperate with human stubbornness. And if the review board determines that the treatments are too dangerous or too experimental to continue? Sam looked at Lyra, whose silver eyes reflected both gratitude and determination. Then we'll find ways to continue the treatments that don't require review board approval. That would be a violation of medical station regulations. That would be a recognition that healing people is more important than following regulations that prevent healing people. Dr. Hayes, Lyra said softly, you would risk your medical license to continue treating me? I would risk a lot more than my medical license to prove that impossible conditions aren't actually impossible, just insufficiently understood by people who've been trained to accept limitations instead of questioning them. Dr. Veltar observed this exchange with growing understanding of the partnership that had developed between his patient and the human physician. It was clear that their collaboration extended beyond simple doctor-patient relationships into something that resembled genuine friendship built around shared curiosity and mutual respect. Dr. Hayes, he said carefully, I will support your documentation with the review board. But I want your assurance that patient safety remains the primary consideration in all experimental protocols. Patient safety and patient healing both remain primary considerations, Sam assured him. Though I define patient safety as including the safety of being allowed to pursue treatments that offer genuine hope rather than just comfort while dying. And I define patient healing as including the healing that comes from being treated as a partner in my own recovery rather than just a collection of symptoms being managed by experts, Lyra added. As they began preparing the comprehensive documentation that would either validate their approach or force them to find alternative ways to continue the healing process, Sam found himself reflecting on how much his understanding of medicine had changed since meeting Lyra. She'd taught him that the best treatments often emerged from collaboration between scientific knowledge and patient experience, while he taught her that impossible diagnoses were often just limitations waiting to be overcome by creative thinking and stubborn optimism. One question, Lyra said as they worked together on organizing their research data. When this is all over and I'm completely healed, and I'm choosing to believe that's going to happen, what's the next impossible case you're going to tackle? That depends, Sam replied with a grin. Are you interested in becoming a permanent partner in solving medical problems that everyone else considers hopeless? Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you the chance to help prove that collaborative medicine between species can accomplish things that individual expertise can't achieve alone. Lyra's smile was radiant with possibilities that had nothing to do with crystalline formations and everything to do with a future that had suddenly become worth planning for. Dr. Hayes, she said, I think I would very much like to be your partner in making impossible healing possible. The Medical Review Board's hearing room was designed to intimidate through architectural authority, with soaring ceilings and imposing displays of medical credentials from across the galaxy. Sam sat at the defendant's table surrounded by documentation that looked like the result of a collision between scientific rigor and creative desperation, while Lyra occupied the observer section with bio readings that told a story more compelling than any legal argument. Dr. Hayes, announced Chief Administrator Corvex, a Regellian whose tentacles writhed with bureaucratic displeasure, you stand accused of implementing unauthorized experimental treatments on a terminal patient, violating established safety protocols, and endangering patient welfare through unsupported medical theories. I stand accused of successfully treating a condition that established protocols declared incurable, Sam replied with the kind of cheerful defiance that had gotten him through 15 years of challenging impossible cases. Though I suppose it's a matter of perspective. The perspective of medical authority suggests that your unauthorized experiments represent dangerous deviation from proven treatment methodologies. The perspective of measurable patient improvement suggests that proven treatment methodologies weren't working and needed creative supplementation. Dr. Veltar, seated at the prosecution table despite his growing sympathy for Sam's approach, activated holographic displays showing Lyra's medical history before and after Sam's intervention. The documented improvements are significant but cannot be considered definitive proof of treatment efficacy. Why not? Sam asked, genuinely curious about the logic that could dismiss measurable healing as insufficient evidence of therapeutic success. Because the improvements occurred through treatments that violate basic principles of species-specific medicine. Cross-species therapeutic protocols introduce variables that cannot be properly controlled or predicted. Cross-species therapeutic protocols introduce opportunities that single-species medicine cannot access, Sam corrected, pulling up his own displays showing the complex interactions between different biological systems that had made Lyra's treatment possible. The reason conventional approaches failed is because they assumed Etherean physiology could only be treated with Etherean medical knowledge. Administrator Corvex's tentacles performed what passed for skeptical gestures among his species. You claim that primitive human medicine succeeded where advanced alien medical science failed. I claim that collaborative medicine combining insights from multiple species succeeded where individual approaches failed. Human medical experience provided understanding of overactive immune responses, Etherean physiology provided the biological framework, Carillion biochemistry contributed mineral supplementation protocols, and Regellian bioelectric therapy supplied the regulatory mechanisms. This approach requires practitioners to master medical knowledge from multiple species, an impossibility for most physicians. This approach requires practitioners to collaborate with experts from multiple species and with patients who understand their own bodies better than outside observers, Sam replied. Which is difficult but not impossible for physicians willing to treat medicine as partnership rather than individual expertise. Lyra rose from the observer section, her movement fluid and confident in ways that made her earlier condition seem like a distant memory. Administrator Korvacs, may I address the board? Patient testimony is not typically considered relevant to medical review proceedings. Patient recovery is typically considered the primary objective of medical review proceedings, Lyra countered with diplomatic firmness. I am the person whose life was at stake, and I believe my experience with both conventional and experimental treatments provides relevant information for this evaluation. The board members conferred in multiple languages before Administrator Korvacs granted permission with obvious reluctance. You may provide limited testimony regarding your treatment experience. Thank you. Lyra moved to the center of the room, her presence commanding attention through quiet dignity rather than dramatic appeal. 6 weeks ago, I was dying from a condition that multiple specialists across several species had declared untreatable. Today, I am not dying. The crystalline formations that were killing me have been reduced by 73%, my cardiovascular function has improved to near normal levels, and I feel better than I have in over a year. Temporary improvements are not uncommon in terminal cases, Dr. Veltar interjected, though his tone suggested decreasing conviction. These are not temporary improvements. These are sustained, measurable changes in my biological function that have continued improving over 6 weeks of treatment. Lyra activated her own holographic display, showing bio-readings that painted a picture of systematic healing rather than temporary symptom relief. More importantly, I achieved these improvements as an active participant in my own treatment rather than as a passive recipient of expert care. Patient participation in treatment planning is standard protocol across all medical specialties, Administrator Korvacs pointed out. Patient participation in treatment development is not, Lyra replied. Dr. Hayes didn't just include me in decisions about my care, he treated me as a partner in researching and developing new approaches to my condition. He valued my knowledge of my own physiology as much as his knowledge of medical science. Such approaches compromise the objectivity necessary for proper medical evaluation. Such approaches provide information that objective medical evaluation often misses. Lyra's voice carried the authority of someone who'd lived through experiences that academic knowledge couldn't capture. Dr. Hayes succeeded where other physicians failed not because human medicine is superior, but because he was willing to learn from my body's responses instead of just applying predetermined protocols. Sam watched this exchange with growing appreciation for Lyra's intelligence and diplomatic skill. She was making the case for collaborative medicine more effectively than he could, partly because she was living proof of its effectiveness and partly because she understood the institutional concerns better than he did. The question before this board, Sam said, standing to address the assembled physicians and administrators, is not whether my methods conform to established protocols. The question is whether medicine exists to serve protocols or to serve patients. Protocols exist to ensure patient safety and treatment efficacy, Dr. Veltar replied. Protocols exist to codify approaches that have proven successful in the past, Sam corrected. But when those approaches fail, protocols become obstacles to discovering new solutions rather than guides to effective treatment. New solutions require extensive testing and validation before implementation. New solutions require careful monitoring and continuous adjustment based on patient response. Which is exactly what we've been doing for 6 weeks while documenting every aspect of Lyra's treatment and recovery. Administrator Korvacs reviewed the massive documentation package that Sam and Lyra had compiled, his tentacles moving in patterns that suggested grudging acknowledgement of thoroughness. The documentation is comprehensive, but the theoretical basis for cross-species treatment protocols remains questionable. The theoretical basis is that biological systems across species share common principles that can be leveraged for therapeutic benefit when properly understood, Sam explained, activating displays that showed the underlying similarities between different species' healing mechanisms. The practical basis is that it works. Single case studies do not constitute sufficient evidence for revolutionary changes to medical practice. Single case studies constitute sufficient evidence for continuing research into revolutionary changes to medical practice, Lyra interjected. Especially when the alternative is accepting that certain conditions are untreatable simply because conventional approaches don't work. Dr. Dex'tahar, who had been growing quieter as the proceedings continued, finally spoke with reluctant admiration. The patient's recovery is undeniable. The question is whether Dr. Hayes's approach can be systematized for broader application. The approach can be taught, learned, and adapted for different conditions and different species, Sam said confidently. The key principles are collaboration between practitioners, partnership with patients, and willingness to combine therapeutic insights from multiple medical traditions. Such principles would require fundamental changes to medical education and practice. Such principles would require medical education and practice to remember that healing is more important than maintaining traditional hierarchies between experts and patients. The board members conferred for nearly an hour, their discussions ranging across multiple languages and species-specific perspectives on medical authority, patient autonomy, and the role of innovation in healthcare. Sam and Lyra waited with the tension of people whose future work together depended on institutional approval for approaches that challenged fundamental assumptions. Dr. Hayes, Administrator Corvex announced finally, the board finds that your experimental treatments produced measurable benefits for your patient despite violating established protocols. However, we cannot approve widespread implementation of your methods without additional research and validation. What does that mean for continued treatment of my current patient and future research into collaborative medicine approaches? It means that you will be permitted to continue treating patient Dex'tahar under supervised experimental protocols, and you will be granted provisional approval for limited research into cross-species therapeutic collaboration. Sam felt relief wash through him, followed immediately by excitement about the possibilities that institutional support would create. What kind of supervision and what limitations on the research? Dr. Dex'tahar will serve as supervising physician for your continued experimental treatments. Research activities will be limited to documented case studies with volunteer patients who have provided informed consent for experimental approaches. Lyra stepped forward with the confidence of someone who just won more than personal healing. Administrator Corvex, will patients be permitted to participate as research partners rather than just research subjects? Explain the distinction. Research subjects receive treatments developed by experts. Research partners help develop treatments through collaboration with experts. The distinction was crucial to the success of my own treatment. The board conferred again, their discussion shorter but more intense than the previous deliberation. Patient partnership in research development will be permitted under appropriate supervision and documentation requirements. As they left the hearing room with approval for continued treatment and research, Sam found himself looking at Lyra with amazement at how much their collaboration had accomplished in just 6 weeks. So, he said, ready to prove that collaborative medicine can be systematized for broader application? Ready to prove that impossible healing is just healing that requires creative partnership, Lyra replied with a smile that radiated health and hope in equal measure. That, Sam said, sounds like the kind of revolutionary medical research that's going to keep us busy for a very long time. 3 months after the Medical Review Board's conditional approval, Sam's research facility had transformed into something that looked like a cross between a cutting-edge laboratory and a very optimistic community center. Patients from a dozen different species worked alongside physicians and researchers, their collaborative efforts producing breakthroughs that individual medical expertise had never achieved. Lyra stood at the center of it all, her complete recovery serving as both inspiration and proof of concept for approaches that had once seemed impossible. The Vulcarian immune cascade syndrome case is responding beautifully to the modified protocol, she announced, manipulating holographic displays that showed the complex interaction between treatments developed specifically for each patient's unique biology. Combining human autoimmune research with Vulcarian thermal regulation therapy and Etherean circulatory support has reduced inflammatory markers by 68% in just 2 weeks. Sam looked up from his work with a Carillion patient whose crystalline physiology was experiencing breakdown similar to what Lyra had faced months earlier. That's what I love about this approach. Every successful treatment teaches us something new about how different species' healing mechanisms can work together. Dr. Hayes, called Dr. Marina Santos, the human physician who joined their team after witnessing results that challenged everything she'd learned about species-specific medicine, the Zephyrian patient in Bay 4 is asking whether her family can participate in her treatment planning sessions. Of course they can participate. Actually, they should participate. Family support systems often provide information about patient needs that clinical observation misses. The family members aren't medically trained. Neither are the patients, technically, but they're the ones living in the bodies we're trying to heal. Medical training provides expertise, but lived experience provides information that expertise can't access independently. Lyra moved to join the conversation, her role having evolved from patient to research partner to something approaching co-director of their revolutionary medical program. Dr. Santos, one of the most important things we've learned is that healing involves more than just fixing biological problems. It involves understanding each person's social, emotional, and cultural context for recovery. Such as the Zephyrian concept of collective health, where individual healing is seen as inseparable from family and community well-being. If we treat her in isolation from her support system, we're working against cultural factors that could enhance her recovery. Dr. Dex'tahar, who had gradually shifted from skeptical supervisor to enthusiastic collaborator, emerged from another treatment bay with readings that showed progress he'd never expected to see. The Etherean nerve regeneration case has achieved 40% function restoration using the combined protocol approach. This exceeds any results produced by conventional Etherean neurological medicine. How does the patient feel about the progress? Sam asked, because he'd learned that patient perception of improvement often provided information that diagnostic readings missed. He describes the sensation as remembering how to feel like myself again. Apparently, the collaborative approach helps patients reconnect with aspects of their identity that illness had compromised. That makes sense, Lyra observed. When you're treated as a partner in your own healing rather than just a recipient of expert care, you maintain agency and identity even when your body isn't functioning normally. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent chime from the communications system, displaying an incoming priority message from the Galactic Medical Council, the institution that governed interspecies healthcare policy across civilized space. The holographic projection showed Administrator Tvara, an imposing Vulcan whose expression suggested she was either very pleased or very displeased about something significant. Dr. Hayes, Dr. Dex'tahar, she began with formal authority, the Council has been monitoring reports of your experimental collaborative medicine program. We require immediate assessment of your methods and results for potential system-wide implementation. Sam and Dex'tahar looked at each other, both recognizing the significance of having their work evaluated for adoption across the galaxy's medical establishment. Administrator Tvara, Sam replied, we'd be happy to provide comprehensive documentation of our approaches and outcomes. Documentation has been reviewed. The Council requires direct observation of your treatment protocols and patient outcomes. You want to visit our facility? The Council wants to evaluate your facility for designation as a pilot program for revolutionary changes to interspecies medical practice. If your results prove reproducible and teachable, your approaches may become standard protocol for complex cases across all medical facilities. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. Their small experimental program could become the foundation for transforming healthcare throughout civilized space, changing how medicine was practiced and how patients were treated across dozens of species and thousands of medical facilities. When would this evaluation take place? Dr. Dex'tahar asked. The evaluation team arrives in 48 hours. You will demonstrate your methods, present your most successful cases, and prove that collaborative medicine can be systematized for implementation by medical professionals who were trained in conventional approaches. After the transmission ended, the facility buzzed with excitement and nervous energy as staff and patients prepared for scrutiny that could validate everything they'd built together. Sam found himself standing beside Lyra, both of them looking out at the collaborative medical community that had grown around their initial partnership. Nervous? Lyra asked. Terrified, Sam admitted. Not because I doubt our methods, but because I doubt whether institutional medicine is ready for approaches that require practitioners to treat patients as equals rather than just recipients of expert care. Then we'll have to prove that treating patients as equals produces better outcomes than traditional hierarchical approaches. And if the evaluation team decides that our methods are too radical for system-wide implementation, then we'll continue doing what we're doing here, and eventually other medical facilities will start adopting our approaches because they work better than conventional methods. The evaluation period proved to be both validation and challenge, with the council's assessment team witnessing patient recoveries that shouldn't have been possible alongside treatment protocols that violated everything they'd been trained to consider proper medicine. Dr. Dex'tahar observed collaborative sessions where patients helped design their own treatment plans, family conferences where cultural factors were integrated into medical decisions, and research meetings where lived experience was valued as highly as clinical expertise. Dr. Hayes, she said after 3 days of comprehensive observation, your approaches produce remarkable results, but they require fundamental changes to how medical professionals are trained and how healthcare institutions operate. Yes, Sam agreed simply. Such changes would be extremely difficult to implement across existing medical systems. Most revolutionary changes are difficult to implement until they become obviously necessary. And you believe collaborative medicine is obviously necessary? I believe collaborative medicine produces better outcomes for patients, better job satisfaction for healthcare providers, and better use of medical resources for institutions. Whether that makes it obviously necessary depends on whether improving patient outcomes is the primary goal of medical systems. Dr. Dex'tahar was quiet for a long moment, her expression cycling through professional assessment and what might have been personal reflection on her own medical career. The council has reached its decision. Sam, Lyra, and the assembled staff waited with the tension of people whose life's work was about to be either validated or dismissed by institutional authority. Your facility will be designated as the first official collaborative medicine research institute, Dr. Dex'tahar announced. Your methods will be studied, systematized, and gradually implemented across the galaxy's medical facilities. You will train other physicians in collaborative approaches, develop standardized protocols that maintain partnership principles, and continue researching applications for conditions that conventional medicine considers untreatable. The celebration that followed was unlike anything Sam had experienced in his medical career, patients, families, and healthcare providers celebrating together as partners in healing rather than as separate constituencies with different roles and interests. So, Lyra said as they watched their colleagues and patients planning the future of medicine together, what impossible case do we tackle next? Actually, Sam replied with a grin that had become familiar to everyone who worked with him, I was thinking we might tackle the most impossible case of all. Which is proving that collaborative medicine can heal the relationship between medical institutions and the people they're supposed to serve. Lyra laughed, the sound bright with possibilities that extended far beyond individual patient care. Dr. Hayes, I think that might be the most revolutionary healing project we've ever attempted. Good thing we've got experience with impossible cases, Sam said, looking around at the community they'd built through partnership, stubborn optimism, and the radical belief that healing worked best when everyone involved was treated as equally valuable. As their facility prepared to become the center for transforming healthcare throughout the galaxy, Sam found himself reflecting on how much his understanding of medicine had changed since meeting a dying Etherean woman who taught him that the best healing happened when doctors and patients worked together as partners rather than as experts and recipients. 6 months earlier, Lyra had been declared untreatable by the galaxy's most advanced medical science. Today, she was helping to train the next generation of physicians in approaches that made the untreatable merely challenging and the impossible simply difficult. You know, Sam said to her as they planned their next research projects, I think this partnership might be the best prescription I've ever written. For what? For proving that hope and human stubbornness can overcome any diagnosis when combined with genuine collaboration and creative thinking. Lyra smiled, her expression radiant with health, purpose, and the deep satisfaction of helping others discover that impossible healing was just healing that required the right kind of partnership. Dr. Hayes, she said, I think that's a prescription the whole galaxy needs to learn about.